Hi there, you're watching Grumpy Opinions. Wandavision is the MCU's flagship standalone TV show on Disney+. It's been an interesting show so far, telling the story of Wanda and Vision, two of the characters from the MCU who have ended up in a strange alternate reality. Now, finally, Episode 9, the season finale, which it literally is in both title and actuality, has dropped. And it starts out exactly where the last episode left off, with Wanda and Agatha squaring up in the street. And of course, Wanda ends up taking a magical pot shot at Agatha, and although it knocks her down, allowing the kids to run away, Aggie just sooks that power straight up from her and leaves Wanda with a gammy hand. And while seeing that the zaps don't work, Wanda just hits her with a car instead, and for a second things seem to be okay. Only right then, White Vision appears and Wanda realises that's the real Vision.
Wanda.
Only he starts crunching her head with his bare hands and Hex Vision zooms in to save her. And the pair of them decide to fight to save Westview, so he jets off to have a zappy punch fight with himself while Wanda tracks down Agatha. Only Aggie doesn't play fair and tells her all about how she's this natural, talented Scarlet Witch, much more powerful than any other magic user out there, and she doesn't even need training because it says so in the manual or the Necromonicon or the Evil Book or whatever. And to prove it, Agatha frees all the townfolk from Wanda's control, and they just beg her to let them go, or at least to, so let them see their kids who've been locked away in their rooms, and to make the nightmares stop, or just to let them die. And Wanda ends up having a total meltdown and starts to choke them all, but then she stops herself realising what she's doing, and when she's done that she starts to pull the Hex apart, allowing them to escape.
Meanwhile,
somehow Jimmy has been captured by S.W.O.R.D. and tells Hayward that the FBI are on their way, which is a bluff, but then he palms Hayward's phone and later picks his handcuffs and calls for reinforcements on it.
Meanwhile,
Monica's stuck in Agatha's house where Quicksilver has her trapped, but in a sort of friendly teenage stoner way.
You found a Steven Seagal?
Only when she tries to leave, he just zooms and stops her. But then she judo flips him and sits on him, which somehow stops him from moving fast or being strong or something.
What?
And she realises he's controlled by the magical necklace, and once she's torn it off, he returns back to normal again. Anyway, the broken hex allows everybody inside to rush out, as I said, and everyone outside to rush in, except for Jimmy, who gets stuck there. But anyway, as it collapses, so does Vision and the kids. So, of course, Wanda decides to start it back up again, just as White Vision remembers he's still part of the story and attacks again. And then Hayward's army arrives, and the family square off against them while Vision goes off to have his fight. Only that turns into a philosophical conversation where both logical robots reason that their orders are flawed, and Hex Vision unlocks White Vision's memories, effectively restoring him back to being who he used to be, sort of, maybe, who knows, because he flies off and we don't hear any more about him. But to complicate matters, Agatha starts walloping the soldiers and Wanda saves them. But then the kids disarm them all apart from Hayward, who decides that since he hasn't done anything bad in a while, and the show hasn't given us any reason to remember that he's actually a villain, he just straight up starts rocking his Glock by shooting at the kids. Only Monica jumps in the way and wibbly wobbly magics the bullets away or something. And Hayward, to his credit, clearly remembers what happens earlier, and tries to use a card to take them out. Only Darcy appears out of nowhere and rams him, and then says a snarky line before vanishing from the episode entirely just as fast as she was written into it. Wanda, on the other hand, has tried using her nightmare magic on Agatha, but she gets that turned back on her, so instead she just goes full massive attack mode, firing out hexes left and right, but draining herself in the process, and ending up with a massive blast that Agatha absorbs the whole of. Only when Agatha tries to retaliate, she can't, because it turns out that all those blasts that seemed to miss had actually been Wanda hexing the outside of the hex with runes, so now Agatha can't do magic at all inside it or something. So Wanda soaks back all of her magic and gets a fancy new costume in the process. Then she zaps Agatha's mind, so Agatha is now stuck as being Agnes from next door, just as she was pretending to be all along. After which, the family all go home, while the hex slowly retracts around them, allowing Wanda to put the kids to bed and say goodbye to them, and then having a tearful farewell to Hex Vision before he and everything else she created completely vanishes. And after that, Wanda just walks away, pretty much scot-free, and hell, Monica even tells her,
"They'll never know what you sacrificed for them."
which is kind of an odd thing to say if you think about it, before she flies out of Westview forever. And because the show still has some loose ends to tie up, during the credits we get a scene of Monica being led away to being debriefed by an agent who turns out to be a Skrull and says a pal of her mother wants to speak to her.
Where?
In space! And then post-credits there's a big flash away to where Wanda is sitting in a log cabin chilling out while her spirit form is studying the evil book of evil magic, and distantly can hear the far-off calls of her children, asking for her help. So what did I think? Well... oh my god. Right, this being the finale, I'll first tell you about what I thought about the episode and then about the show itself as a whole. And as usual, I'm going to start with the good stuff, and that'll be fairly short, trust me. I will say that most of this episode was beautifully shot. Great cinematography, some really competent action. Not really surprising, because, I mean, Matt Shackman, who directed the show, has a solid history of TV direction, and this is proven by he can do a wide variety of styles as well. I mean, for example, this is the same guy who directed that Game of Thrones episode with a massive battle of the Lannisters and the Dothraki, and the dragon running, strafing everybody with fire. So yeah, tried and tested, knows what he's doing. I also really, really liked the scene with Vision and Vision having the little robot discussion on philosophy. You know, going on about the ship of Theseus, which is, I mean, it's basically a very entry-level philosophical puzzle, and, you know, that, but I have heard that scene is directly out of the comics, so, I mean, I wouldn't know that, but I read it somewhere online, so fair enough. Still, I mean, that was just interesting. It was kind of fun. It was like a bit of a serious version of that scene from Red Dwarf a few years ago where Crichton and his doppelganger have a similar exchange.
Since the only ingredients in your psyche are mine, you are now incapable of malice. And because a human life takes precedent over the life of any mechanical, you are in fact compelled to assist our safe passage to Starbug. As long as the others remain unconscious, your logic is impeccable.
And I also thought that the cast did a pretty good job in making the emotional scenes really play out well. I mean, Paul Bettany can do this stuff in his sleep, and the real revelation this season has actually been Olsen, who frankly never really needs to prove anything acting-wise ever again after this, especially about being sad. I also really like the idea of them going back to Wanda using the magic that we saw her doing in Age of Ultron, and also how Agatha managed to turn that back on her, showing that, you know, she is a centuries-old witch who is much smarter than Wanda and has years and years of experience doing all this stuff. So, I mean, a lot of tricks don't work on her. While she's still only human, you know, you can still backhand her with a little hatchback if she's not looking. Which also led to that cute wee reference to the Wizard of Oz. But frankly, there are so many problems with this episode that I kind of don't even know where to begin. So, right, I'll start with the person who had the least amount of screen time, who was Darcy, who literally appears out of absolutely sodden nowhere right at exactly the right moment, crashing her circus van into Hayward's Humvee. Now, again, it's not impossible, sure enough, but it begs the question of, A, how it took her so long to get there, considering, I mean, you know, she left ages ago in the middle of nowhere, last episode, and somehow Hayward's lot, who were actually even further away, arrived before her, despite them starting outside of the Hex. Now, also for her to have crashed into him, she'd have to presumably have realised that he was in the car, since, you know, she says,
"Have fun in prison!"
So, yeah, so you obviously knew it was him, so it was intentional. So was she just parked nearby? Was she watching all this? Was she waiting? Why wasn't she helping or doing anything? I mean, I hate to say it, it's one of those moments where you're just not supposed to think about it. And similarly, Jimmy, I mean, actually his part in the episode was the one that made the most sense, because, I mean, they've already established he that likes the magic tricks he learned them in Ant-Man, so no problem with that, as I said, has been previously established. But now he's the guy fully in charge of this whole operation? I mean, this guy. Yeah, who did this a couple of episodes ago for no reason. Okay. And that leads into Hayward. I mean, Hayward is a disaster of a character, you know, who out of nowhere blabs this big plan to Jimmy rather than just arresting him for beating up some S.W.O.R.D guys, which he totally could have done, legitimately. Then, despite seeing Agatha doing this to his guys, he decides it's a better idea, rather than shooting at Agatha, to pull a handgun on a pair of kids. I mean, okay, technically these kids aren't real people, but what? Why? I mean, how would that help? I mean, maybe, yeah, best case, it gets your guys back in action, but you've just realised you're up against magic. I mean, as far as he knows, White Vision is going to take all these people out, and you shouldn't have to worry about that. Which is another point. Now, he now has White Vision. Now, why isn't he just bugging out completely or nuking the whole town? I mean, he could have got White Vision to phase out into the Hex and drop a bomb there for him, since he clearly wasn't free thinking at that point. And continuing with White Vision, I mean, if his mission is to destroy the Vision, why does he start by attacking Wanda and like literally cracking her skull? You can hear her skull crack in his hands. So unless that was his knuckles cracking, she should be borderline brain damaged at this stage, because she is only human, even if she is a witch. And during the Vision brawl, how come like Vision shoots down Hex Vision in the big Harry Potter Wand battle bit, but then just doesn't appear again for like 5 minutes during all of this business, when he could have easily just landed and taken Vision out in 2 seconds? Again, you're not supposed to think about it. Or things that happen like how Monica can overpower Quicksilver, you know, even when clearly he must have already overpowered her since last time we saw them outside. And now suddenly they're in this room and he won't let her leave. Now, this is the guy who can move this fast. So why would her sitting on him even matter? I mean, hell, he should have been out of her way before she even managed to grab him. And I know some folk are apparently cross because he's actually turns out to be some guy called Ralph from Westview. He's not the real Quicksilver, but to be honest, I don't care about that. It was a red herring that was really there for Twitter hype and for bad website articles to get churned out, so actually I just don't care about that. Monica, on the other hand, Monica. Since the beginning of this show, she has been one of the worst things about it, and this week, she jumps in front of a bullet, which is fine, noble enough, all good. What got me, though, is, after everything is over, even though she had such a small, minimal part in everything, she literally just tells Wanda,
They'll never know what you sacrificed for them.
I mean, what? What's that supposed to mean? I mean, Wanda has kept a town of like 1,000 people trapped in constant agony, living out this weird hellscape nightmare, partially aware of what's going on, and literally was choking them to death a minute ago. And she threatened the life of Hayward a few episodes ago, and she just mind-wiped somebody, trapping them into being like, effectively a brain slave for as long as she feels like it. And Monica's like, nah, it's fine, you just go have fun. I know you've had a bad couple of weeks recently. I'd have probably done the same thing. What? I mean, that just doesn't make any sense. I mean, what is the message of this? I mean, this is a world where, things like the Sokovia Accords exist. That, there was a whole film called Civil War, which was all about that, about rules being put in place so superheroes couldn't just cause massive amounts of collateral damage because the Avengers were too powerful and needed oversight. I mean, remember that movie? This is exactly what that's about. And yet Monica doesn't give a toss because she's off to space any minute with the Green Lady so she can hang out with Captain Marvel. Which really just leaves us with Agatha and Wanda and their big showdown, which made up the meat of this finale. Now, one of the benefits of a show like this is that with magic in it, magic's vague enough that you can pretty much pull anything you want out its arse without it actually having to explain anything. The trouble is, that kind of thing can be really unsatisfying if you're not an idiot, basically. And the problem with it, the big fight that they actually had at the end, was none of it really made any sense. We didn't understand the stakes because we don't understand the power. And if the situation is that Monica is this natural witch who doesn't need to train, she can just do everything, and Agatha is like the old, wiser, trained witch, that's something that's been explored in interesting places. Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, which is actually a fantastic book, and they made a half-decent TV show of it, from what I'm led to believe. I've not actually watched it yet, but I've heard good things. Is literally a story with that exact premise, and it's really interesting. Whereas here, it just seems to be that sometimes Agnes can do things, but then sometimes Wanda can do whatever she wants just by thinking about it, but it's not very clear. I mean, it's really lazy writing. It's really badly done. And frankly, that just kind of sours everything, because if that's the crux of the whole situation, it leaves us in a state where it's really unclear what the motivations of characters were and who was actually good and who was bad. Because here's the main problem here. You've got Hayward and you've got Agatha, and both of these characters effectively are just trying to stop bad things happening. Now sure, both of them have an ulterior motive, a bad agenda behind them, but ultimately, Hayward's kind of trying to stop Vision, and he's quite happy to kill Wanda to do it. Now granted, he wants Vision because he basically Boromir in Lord of the Rings. He wants the bad weapon so they can use it for the good of humanity, rather than letting it stay in the hands of anybody else. Now sure, he's a bad guy and we want him put away, but ultimately, his motivations are actually for protecting humans. You've then got Agatha, who's basically saying, I don't want the witch who's the one destined to end the world to appear. And that's you. Now, yeah, sure, she does want the power herself. She wants to be an evil, superpowered witch. Fair enough. It's probably not a good thing. But ultimately, her goal is not destroying the world. So, yeah, you've actually got two people who have a fairly sensible end goal. Whereas you've then got Wanda, who's just kind of all over the place, slightly mental, and is quite happy to choke out and or murder and cause the deaths or pain and torture of 1,000 people. And the show just goes, yeah, that's fine, it's okay, because she's a goodie, really. She's the good one, remember? Look, she has a nice mountain cabin and she can do the same trick that Doctor Strange was doing in his movie. You remember that? Yeah, and there's even the music in the background. Yeah, well, it's okay, because just remember, Wanda's one of the good ones. We might be trying to do a sort of Dark Phoenix thing with her later on, but for now, nah, she's just a goodie. Frankly, it's a massive disappointment. So overall, WandaVision hasn't really been a fantastic advert for the MCU going forward as far as I'm concerned. I mean, it started well, as I said. The first 3 episodes were really, really interesting. Episode 4 started to fall apart a bit, and then after that it was a mixed bag, with the last episode just being a mess. Now, in fairness to the show, I have read online that a huge amount of the last episode had to be binned because of COVID-19. Apparently, there was going to be a whole section where originally the kids and Darcy and Monica all ended up chasing underground and having a fight with Mr. Scratchy, who was going to turn into a big monster or something. There was a bunch of other side plots as well that all got cut in the end, some longer extended bits. There was an interview online about it with Matt Shackman, and apparently a lot of these things had to be just binned because everybody was sent home after COVID, and a lot of the special effects had to be completed from people on their home computers. Now obviously, this is Disney people working at home, probably with amazing computers that they were sent. So it's not like, they churned it out on the cheap on their old Atari ST. But basically, it does cause some problems. And I forgive it that, but the problem is overall, it's still a pretty naff show and a pretty naff way of moving forward. And in some ways, it soured me towards these TV shows. I'm straight up now going to say, I'm not going to cover Falcon and Winter Soldier. I mean, I'll maybe do a roundup video at the end of it where I talk about it, but I'm not going to do week-to-week episodes of it. It's just not interested, frankly. The same goes for Loki. Because, I mean, these shows are basically on from now until Christmas. There will be a Marvel property dropping every single Friday, whether it's an episode of a show or a making of or a movie. There's something dropping every Friday between now and the end of the year, effectively. And I'm not covering all that. I'm just not interested at this point, having watched this. I mean, maybe if Falcon Winter Soldier turns out to be good, maybe I'll cover Loki. Who knows? But otherwise, yeah, I've got to be honest, I kind of think for me, a lot of the MCU's appeal died at the end of Endgame. I mean, that's just me. But this has been an interesting show. Again, I loved the sitcom aspect of it. I liked some of the character work. I liked some of the acting work. But then other aspects of it were just downright terrible. It's a real shame. But that's where it leaves me. So luckily this is a one-off. I think, as I understand, there's not supposed to be another series of this. Each one of these is a single standalone series. And just a note on upcoming videos. Due to some work commitments, I'm probably going to have to do fewer videos over the next few months, just because I'm not going to have time during the week to do work on anything. So I'll be working on things on the weekends. So expect at least one video a week, is probably all I can promise at this point, plus my movies by month videos when I get them out. So yeah, sorry about that, but I will try and keep as much out as I can do. But for now, that's all I've got to say on WandaVision. So till next time. You've been watching my very grumpy opinions. And a special thanks to all my patrons, and most especially my top tier patrons Judith Coloma, Laurie Laporte, and Michelle Forbes. Thanks guys, everyone keep it real, keep safe, and take care of yourselves. Bye bye.